All right. Welcome to another episode of the See Right Through podcast. I got my brother, Bookman. I'm gonna let
Yes,
him
yes.
introduce himself. We're gonna have a good build tonight. It's very interesting. We're gonna go in on Haiti, but I'm gonna let him take the floor. Go on, brother.
All right, greetings. My name is Bookman. I'm a young content creator, and I'd humbly describe myself as a aspiring historian and scholar on the rise. One of my centers of interest is Haiti. That's what we come to build on today, and that's where my brother is from. It's a pleasure to connect with
Mhm.
someone all the way out in New York. I was saying to him, as iron sharpens iron, so a friend sharpens a
Mhm.
friend. And yeah, as I said, Haiti is one of my centers of interest. It's actually a large part of the inspiration behind the name Bookman. I'm sure
Mhm.
you're well familiar with Bookman. We can touch on that later. So yeah, young content creator, passionate about history, passionate about Haiti.
And you have a channel, right? So I'm gonna make sure I link everything
Yeah, I've
below.
got
You
a
send me the
channel
links, and we work it
on
out.
on YouTube, on
Mhm.
Instagram. So that's where my content creation goes. I share some of my thoughts and knowledge via hip hop, via cross-referencing of books that I present in a somewhat artistic form.
Mhm.
Um, if you leave the link, the people can
Yeah,
let the
they'll
work
they'll
speak for
they'll see.
itself.
So tell us, brother. Tell us a little bit about the importance of Haiti and why we should study Haiti and know a few things about Haiti.
Haiti, right? Essentially, when it comes to Black Revolution, it's what I would call the black print, not the blueprint, the
Mhm.
black print. And it's a neglected part of our story that has been clouded in propaganda that's mostly to do with voodoo,
Mhm.
that causes a lot of our diaspora to neglect this history,
Mhm.
and kind of sweep all things Haitian to the side. Anybody wants to talk about the greatness of the revolution, which, is the most significant revolution, at least in modern history, because it's the
Mhm.
only time, right, that a population, an enslaved population, have managed to overthrow the government and then become the government. Because all over the Americas, there were many revolutions. You had the Maroons in Jamaica, which had a degree of success because they
Mhm.
achieved autonomy, but they never managed to become the government, create their own flag, etc. So this is really what inspired a lot of us across the Americas to revolt, and it's the most successful revolution. So to overlook it for any reason,
Mhm.
it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense because even when we look at it, we see how it wasn't just men. It was African women who really took lead in that revolution and who made it
A lot,
possible.
a
We talk
lot.
about Defile,
Hmm
Cecile Fatima.
Defile, Defile. I read she was part of what they would call a prostitute corps, right?
Mhm.
Those who would essentially use just to keep it simple, a
Yeah,
seductive power
method.
to get
Mhm.
advantage over the French. But yeah, from the
Because she
very
knew her
start,
beauty.
oh yeah,
Yeah,
oh
she knew
yeah,
she was
we
a very beautiful woman.
like all Asian women, man.
Uh huh. Yeah. Talk on the brother.
Oh,
Talk.
belle femme, belle femme.
Mhm.
But yeah, from the very start of the revolution, it started, as you said, with Cecil Fatiman. Then you have, I'm not 100% sure what her first name is, Martinielle.
Mhm.
She was actually described by Dessalines at one point as Haiti's bravest soldier, and she was awarded a very high military honor.
Mhm.
She was a nurse, but she was on the front line, putting her life on the line. So as you said, women were most certainly playing their role in that revolution.
Mhm. And a big role. I believe it was Scobie. Scobie said that they learned how to grind glass so fine that, like, because if you eat glass, you die. But they ground it so
Hmm.
fine that it would kill the enslaving master over time. It was techniques like that.
Our people were so intelligent, so
Mhm.
resistant and creative in the face of oppression. you know, and to tell the truth, that's the first time I've heard of that story. But
Mhm.
as much as I am very impressed by that story, I'm not very surprised
Yeah.
by it, you know, because we're a genius people, you know. We're a very, very genius people. Even when it came to medicinal plants,
Mhm.
we put those to full use as well, except we
Exactly.
didn't use them as medicine, at least not in the
Mhm.
case I'm referring to at the moment. It was more so
To poison.
for the sake of poison, you
Mhm.
know. You look at the example of people like Francois Macandal,
Mhm.
he had a plot to exterminate, allegedly, according to what is written, all of the whites on the island, you know.
Same thing with with the Saline, and that's
Oh
what
yeah,
Toussaint
oh
didn't
yeah.
like. Toussaint.
But I think Dessalines was more so somebody, he more so sought to do that via the sword, whereas
Mhm.
I think Makandal, he was seeking to do that slowly but surely via, but those are the minor details, you
Mhm.
know. Dessalines, when it comes to the extermination of the whites, different sources kind of portray it in a slightly different light.
Mhm.
Because some of the scholars I've read from, they tend to say that he wanted to exterminate all of the whites, whereas some say all of the enslavers, or at least all of the French, which is sometimes mistaken for
Mhm.
all of the whites. But continue, because I believe you were about to make a point in reference to Toussaint.
Oh, because yeah, Toussaint was very a great general, a great
Oh
great
yeah,
general, but he was too much of a Frenchman. He had too much of
oh
that
yeah.
in them. So even during the Bois Cayman ceremony, when Bookman told him, "Put down the white man's God. The white man's God has committed crimes against you. Pick up the African God." And you know what he started
Mm,
doing? He started reciting the Santa Maria, the Catholic prayers.
well, that's something I can't contest. Toussaint is somebody that, on the surface level, he's like the poster boy of the Haitian Revolution, right?
Because he liked
So
that's why they'll put him out there because he wanted to.
there you go, because at the end of the day, it does conform more with what, let's say, what they would like us to follow.
Mhm.
Because, for example, one book that makes this very clear and articulates it well is The Irritated Genie. The Irritated Genie by Jacob Carruthers. It actually describes the opposing philosophy of Toussaint and Dessalines. And Toussaint is essentially described as someone who, his entire fight against the oppression was actually motivated by a desire to share in the world created by his oppressors, who,
Mhm.
first and foremost, are the French. Whereas Dessalines was simple, he was all about independence and
Mhm.
freedom by any means necessary. Of course, it's two very different times, environments, and fights, but it's somewhat comparable to Malcolm versus Martin,
Mhm.
Toussaint being Martin, of course.
Or even Du Bois versus no, I don't want to say versus, but
Yeah, yeah,
their ideologies. It was different,
of
but the way
course.
Dessalines handled it was the way that it needed to be handled. Toussaint allowed his very oppressors to write his constitution for him, and that can't
Yeah,
be.
yeah. And sometimes I wonder what really caused that. Was it a lack of confidence in the ability of his own people to do so? Was it well, there was definitely
I mean, he
too
was
much confidence, too much trust in the French, because
yes,
that's what led him
it's
to
because he was
go and
educated by them.
negotiate with them,
Yeah,
you know, get on that boat to go and negotiate with them, and end up dead not so long later, you know.
to go negotiate. Do you know the story of how they got him? They made him wait 30 minutes there. And Dessalines warned
mm,
him. Dessalines said, "Don't go." He said, "I wouldn't go, but if I was to go, I will go with 300 of my most cracked men." Of course, he said it in
mm,
Creole, but he said, "I will go with 300 of my most cracked men, and I would tell them surround the perimeter. And if
mm.
I'm not out, it's 9 o'clock. If I'm not out in 30 minutes, burn it down."
And who did Toussaint go with?
two people, his two generals, and
Yeah,
then
yeah.
he made him wait. They made him wait 30 minutes.
I shouldn't laugh, but
But that's
it's
the
just
thing. And you know where he died? In a prison
yeah.
in France. They found
Yeah,
him. He
yeah, yeah.
froze to
He
death.
essentially was starved
Mhm.
and he deteriorated due to the cold weather,
Mhm.
is what I've read. Because this was a man that spent his entire life in the tropics, in the
Mhm.
tropical sun, right? And then he went to a cold cell in France, was probably being malnourished. One word that just comes to mind is naive, to tell the truth,
Mhm.
because at this point, if I'm not mistaken, it was already coming towards the end of the revolution. By the time he was being invited over to France. So there had already been not only a long precedent of enslavement and oppression in face of the French people, but they had been fighting an all-out war for some time now.
Mhm.
But despite that, he felt safe getting on a boat with two men, you said, to go and negotiate.
No, they didn't even. He got on the boat in chains because when they got there, they put chains around his wrists and his ankles, and they took him out of there.
That is crazy.
They warned him too. That's the crazy thing.
And Toussaint, he's done many questionable things. One thing that stands out to me is Maurice. I'm not sure how familiar you are with Maurice.
Mhm.
Some of the sources I've read said he was Toussaint's cousin, and some of them say that was his nephew. But he, long story short, executed Maurice, and it goes back to what you mentioned. It's the same thing that caused some of his quarrels with Dessalines, right?
Mhm.
He had a lot of compassion and a lot of mercy for the white French and the Europeans in general. And Maurice is described as an all-out warrior, long story
Mhm.
short. The image that I get from the stories that I've read is that even more than Dessalines, he was just a complete warrior on the battlefield. Some of the sources even go as far as saying that he enjoyed and he loved slaughtering
Mhm.
Europeans. So there was a moment in time when the story goes that Toussaint had promised safety to a certain group of Europeans,
I
and
believe
Maurice slaughtered them.
he saved his master, his enslavement master. He took him to safety before the revolution started. He got him on a ship.
That's crazy. That's a Stockholm
Yeah, it's
syndrome right
different,
there.
but these are the lessons
Stockholm.
we learn. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. Because this is not like to crucify
No, of
Toussaint
course,
was
but this is
not here.
something
But
we
at
need
the
to
end of the
review.
day, what are we studying history for if
Mhm.
it's not to learn from our mistakes and see how we can adjust from them, and correct ourselves going forwards,
Mhm.
So this is not to put Toussaint on a in front of a jury and say
Yeah,
Toussaint, because at the end of the day, like you said, Toussaint was a great general.
but he
He
must
was
be held
somebody,
accountable.
of course, like
Yeah,
like everybody else, because there are a lot of, to say the least, very
Toussaint's.
questionable actions. That's just to say the least
And there's a
questionable.
lot of
That's
Toussaint's
going
today.
easy. That's going
Mhm.
easy. Questionable.
And that's why we
To
say,
to
because there's a lot of Toussaint's today. There's a lot of people who are willing to put so much on the line for people who wouldn't do the same for us.
Of course, across the diaspora, not just in the Caribbean,
Mhm.
unfortunately, or just in Haiti. We're a very compassionate people,
Yes,
but
we
then
are.
that compassion is not always reciprocated.
And it goes back to even to Kemet with the Greeks,
Mm,
how they did the same thing. We teach them, and then they come and
they come
they
back
take over. Yeah, it's
with no
always the same
mercy,
thing. But like
with
we
no
said, there's
mercy,
lessons we need to learn.
of course. Because, it goes back to the same question I asked earlier, what are we studying history
Mhm.
for if it's not to learn from our experiences in order to go forward, you
Mhm.
know? So of course we have to review all of these things and adapt accordingly.
And be honest and tell the story honestly, because that's the thing with a lot of these movements. Our people don't want to identify with who we really are. We got people claiming to be Hebrews, claiming to be. Some people claim that the enslavement trade never happened. That they were here.
Oh, to tell the truth, right? To claim that the you know, from my perspective, I don't perceive the Hebrew claim to be ridiculous, depending on what
It
lineage you are
it
from.
it depends how
Because
they
I
take
believe
it.
it depends how they say it. The way I draw the line is because I see Africa as the place of origin of many of these cultures that are not so much connected to Africa anymore. So the Hebrew thing, I don't perceive it as ridiculous. What
No,
I
of course.
perceive
Are
as
you familiar
ridiculous
with
is
the
when
Hyksos?
based of the with
The
the who?
Hyksos.
No, to tell the truth, I'm not.
But gonna continue. We could
So
elaborate
what
on
I was
that.
going to say is I don't perceive the Hebrew claim to be ridiculous. What I do perceive to be ridiculous when it comes to the Hebrew claim is when people, based upon that claim, try to sever all ties with the African continent. That's when you can
There you
see
go.
that a certain self-hate has driven someone towards a movement which could have a certain level of truth to it. Because to tell the truth, I will tell the truth, right? I used to debate Hebrew Israelites on the street, bro. But then, right, from under my computer, man. Imagine they're trying to shut us down, man. My Ethernet cable's been connected, and all of a sudden, it's trying to tell me, it's trying to tell me it's not connected, you know. So the dark forces
It's
are
a
at work,
setup,
man.
yeah.
Or the white forces.
The light, yeah. The you
Where
already
did we
know.
leave off? I believe you
Um.
were mentioning something to do with was it Hicks? So
Oh
we
yes,
were we,
yes,
we,
yes. That you were
we,
saying
we were
that
touching briefly
that
on
you
the
used to debate
Hebrews.
the Hebrew Israelites. That's what you said.
I used to debate the Hebrew Israelites on the street, right? Because one thing I've noticed about the Hebrew Israelites is like a lot of movements, the people that will come out and be the loudest are the least rational, most radical, most religious minded of the entire group. But I took the opportunity when the internet cut out to pick up this, right? I'm not sure if you've heard of this book, right?
From Babylon to
Babylon to
Timbuktu.
Timbuktu. If you ever wanted to listen to a narrative from a scholarly Hebrew Israelite minded brother who is not just a radical man on the street corner shouting verses, I'd recommend this one because what it essentially does is analyzes several African cultures and certain practices that you find within those cultures that people associate with Judaism today. Because to tell the truth, I would argue Africa is the root,
Of
one way or
course.
another, of most things. But I believe you were about to touch on
Yeah, the Hyksos, because
the Hexos. Yeah, tell me about the
when we
Hexos.
talk about the Hyksos, a lot of scholars are now saying that those are the proto Hebrews because those people come from Canaan. So
Canaan,
there's no
okay.
evidence of like that's why I like to debate them too, because first of all they'll defend the worst parts of the Bible, the worst parts,
Hmm.
the misogyny, the the contradictions, and then they'll tell you you don't know how to read, you're misinterpreting that. Also, no, I know how to read, I learned how to read. Like, you can't play me like that. But yeah, when you look at a lot of the things in that tradition, of course it comes from Africa. We have the first resurrection story in Africa, the first virgin birth story.
Yeah, is it Osiris or
Yeah,
Isis and Horus and so forth? There's a lot of
similarities.
there's a lot of similarities, and then even beyond, I've got a book. I actually made a post about this on Instagram. This, to be honest, this might be a good opportunity to share the
Yeah, you
screen,
want to share? Go
but
ahead.
we may get very sidetracked from Haiti.
Let's,
That's what I'm
we,
trying to weigh up in my mind right
we
now.
got time. We got time, bro. If you want
Okay,
to,
so we
let's
got
break it
time.
down. Let's break it
Let me
down.
search for it because
Okay.
I put it onto my I put it onto my Instagram. So what I'll do is I'll scroll down and I'll find it. Just give me a couple minutes, or hopefully a bit less than that. Because the question that I ask myself when it comes to the story, the similarities of these
Mm-hmm.
resurrection stories, right, is, in my younger days, I would have perceived it as somebody must have copied somebody, which to an extent is true. But then now, at this point in time, I wonder if it's just a scattered group of people
I mean, we
playing
know.
Chinese whispers kind of
Mm-hmm.
vibe, if you know what I mean,
I know
or
what you mean.
one could say Hebrew whispers. Do you know what I mean? So the Hebrews, or perhaps the Hexos, as you might know them, I'm not familiar with that
Mm-hmm.
term, ending up in Egypt, might have manifested their mythology in one way, and then
Mm-hmm.
those that ended up in another land in another way, in another way. Because even in India, you've got this resurrection story.
You know
I
why? You
believe
know why?
I've just found. Go on, tell me, brother.
Because the Kemetic people went up to India and introduced that to them.
Mm. See, this is something that, tell the truth, that's my first time hearing
Yeah, we
about
gave them the
that
concept
specifically.
of
I know.
the golden cow, which is goddess Hathor.
Mm. Yeah, 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 and you know what? I can resonate with that because I'll actually show you something afterwards, right? For example, the way I interpret the Bible, right, is that you familiar with the story of the Exodus when the children of Israel started to
Mm-hmm.
worship a golden calf? I believe that was taken from the Kemetic bull god. I believe
Of
the name is
course.
Apis. So, the Hebrew culture is a culture that springs out of Egypt. It may have some very controversial
Yeah.
elements,
Yeah, because that was a group of people who took the stories and made them according to their own social mores and where they come from. They
Let
took it
me see
with
if I
their
can share
perspective.
the
Yeah, just let me
screen.
know when you're gonna share.
Go live. Okay. Can you see this, yeah?
Give me 1 second.
And you see the caption I put is, this was a while ago, but of these crucified saviors, the most prominent were Osiris and Horus of Egypt, Krishna of India, Mithra of Persia, Quetzalcoatl of Mexico, Adonis of Babylon, and Attis of Phrygia. Nearly all of these slain savior gods have the following stories related about them. They are born of a virgin on or near December 25th. Their births are heralded by a star. They are born either in a cave or stable. They are slain commonly by crucifixion. They descend into hell and rise from the dead at the beginning of spring brackets Easter, and they finally ascend into heaven. So, the caption I wrote is what I had just said to you. Religious plagiarism or scattered people of the book playing Chinese whispers, or maybe I should say Israelite whispers. These are things that I intend to clarify over time with more and more scholarship. But I can definitely see the parallel. I can definitely see the parallel between all of these stories, and it does signify a common thread of one kind or another. Romans, yeah, oh for sure. And I think that is one thing that people need to recognize on both sides of the story, because those who would try to devalidate Kemet and so forth from a Christian perspective would probably not recognize that. And then you have people on the Kemetic side of the story, um, who would highlight that, who would highlight the alleged absence of records of a Hebrew culture, or a Hebrew exodus and so forth in the land of Kemet. But then one thing I always just remind myself of, as food for thought, is that these people burnt the Library of Alexandria. You know, what was in that library? What was in that who will know? Of course, of course, of course, of course. Mm. And to tell the truth, right? A lot of the stories have been lost to a degree in translation, because yeah, everybody, yeah, yeah, yeah. A lot of, one could call it myth or parable. I see it as like a mix of that with some history, with essentially, if I was to sum up how I would perceive the Bible, I would see it as the esoteric, parabolic, spiritual, cultural, historical book of the ancient nation of Israel. But through time and through translation, I think a lot of that has been, because you have to remember whose hands these books fell into. Do you know what I mean? Councils. I'm not sure about the economical councils. I know about the Council of Nicaea. Yeah, 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 yeah. Mm, yeah, a lot of the books, a lot of the books were not well. I don't believe any of the books were written at the time that of the story that they're actually telling. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We know to tell the truth. We know to tell the truth. Yeah, and brother, a better example, right? The J. The J that you find all over the Christian doctrine, right? The Jesus, the Jehovah, the Jerusalem, the Jew, the tribe of Judah. The J didn't exist in the time of the actual manifestation, so to speak, of this culture, these stories. So that's just one example of how things have been lost in translation over time. Lost in translation over time for sure. You know what? That's a good example for me to share another. Hold on. Stop streaming and start streaming again in a second. I'm just gonna hunt for, because I actually created a post about the similarities between the Igbo culture. The Igbo culture. Are you familiar with the
Yeah.
Igbos? Most Igbos in Nigeria, most like over 90% of them will tell you they're descendants of the ancient Jews. And these are not things that they got from somebody on the street corner. These are things that they got from their grandparents and their grandparents before them, because like I said, my mother is from that culture, and although she's not into that whole Judaic roots,
Can they
some of the
can they tell
aunties
you
I've met.
when they started, when this began, or have they always said this?
To tell the truth, I can tell you it does predate the British colonization, but I couldn't tell you the exact date that they started
Okay.
with, because I've got a book. Because the Igbo oral history says that they came there from Egypt, and to tell the truth, these are people who have the receipts to back up a lot of their
No,
claims,
they
even
do
if they're
same
not
thing with
deep
the
in.
Yoruba people. The Yoruba
Yeah,
people say
yeah,
they came
and
from
and
Kemet.
yeah, and the Yoruba are also mentioned in Babylon to Timbuktu. Um, and even in Ethiopia, we got various Hebrew
When
cultures.
you
So this
say
is,
Hebrew, my brother,
yeah.
do you
Hold on, I'm
mean
gonna need to change the slides. Yeah, go on, go on. The according to my version of events. Okay, go on. Yeah, yeah, he's half Ethiopian Jew, isn't he? It means foreigner, and even it means foreigner, and this is what people aside from the so-called Falashas call them, but the Falashas call themselves Beta Israel, which means House of Israel. So when it goes to Ethiopia and Judaism, there's a long history there, and that's what I was about to mention. So according to the Kebra Gas, if we are to take that story as something that has a certain level of historic truth, even if it is wrapped up in a certain level of it kind of reads like a historic fiction, to tell the truth. But anyway, that's another topic, right? Some of the people in Ethiopia, according to me, would have been the original Jews who came with that migration, and then some of the people would have been the people like the Queen of Sheba who were worshipping the moon and the sun, who listened to the wisdom of Solomon and took on that culture. So I think you've got both. I think you've got both. My perception is that the same way it's like not every single black person today is a descendant of the black Kemetic people. All the Kemetic people were black. I kind of see the Hebrew situation the same. Not all black people have anything to do. Most black people probably have nothing to do with the Hebrews. But I think all the Hebrews of the ancient times were black people. That's my perspective. Of course. So what can come from them? Anything so ancient, how can it come from them? You know, um, when one reads, even the Bible is a book, the Torah, these books are considered to varying degrees to be of historical credibility, right? But then when you're talking about the Hebrews, they're not placing any book above their Torah. And their own Torah will show you that these people they're claiming as their forefathers were black people. Because when Moses went to the land of Midian, he was mistaken for an Egyptian. And when Joseph went into the Pharaoh's temple, his own brothers didn't recognize him amongst the Egyptians. And the list goes on and on to tell the truth. Moses put his hand into his coat. Moses put his hand into his cloak, and it says that when his hand it came out white as snow. But then God restored his flesh. So if his skin became white and was then restored, then clearly he was not white in the first place. You know? Can you see my screen at the moment? Okay, so this was I did a cross-referencing. I'm not sure if I've got the book nearby. Yes, I do. Let me grab it just to show you the front cover. So this is the book. You can still see me now, right? With the video. Yeah, so this is the book that I did a cross-referencing with, mostly with the Old Testament. Right. It's a book written by a guy called Olahuda Equiano, who was renamed Gustavus by some European kidnapper. But essentially, he's from the Igbo culture in southeast Nigeria. And throughout this book, he actually mentions how he came into contact with Jewish people after being taken into the transatlantic slave trade. He was taken into slavery in the USA, in Barbados. He was enslaved on a British naval ship. And he said that he saw, word for word, striking similarities between his culture and that of the Jews. So we can kind of interpret the history in different ways, but there's a link somewhere. So let's have a quick look at some of these, right? It mentions offerings, particularly at full moons, offerings eaten with bitter herbs. So when I read this, I said to myself, hold on, this is a Nigerian, West African culture, but doesn't that sound very much like the biblical Passover? To sacrifice an animal, to roast it with bitter herbs. You can see the Old Testament scriptures are at the bottom. You've got some from Exodus, you've got some from Numbers. This part mentions, and this book was written in the 18th century. Let me see if I can quickly look at the date it was first published. Uh, Let me see if I can quickly find it. You can see on the screen it's got he's likened his people to the Israelites in their primitive state, and he's mentioned the law of retaliation, which I would perceive to be the so-called eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth law. So this man, he was born in 1745 in what is now southeastern Nigeria. So that's Igbo land. Some know it as Biafra. And he was taken into the slave trade at age 11. So the English slave traders transported to the West Indies, taken to Virginia later enslaved on a British naval ship. But we can't go too deep into his life at this moment. That's that law of retaliation, right? Then we've got this menstrual seclusion, which exists in some of the other cultures, even amongst the Ashanti, according to Babylon's Timbuktu. There was a menstrual seclusion where the women at certain yeah. So as I said in my go on. Yeah. Essentially, there's a level of seclusion. They do not cook. They do not really do anything. They are in their own space. So go on, because I believe you're about to make a point with regards to I believe these are the people that influence the modern day Jewish people. That's my perception because we know that black people came before these people, and even according to the writings that these Jewish people hold above everything else, it would logically point to these people, black people on the continent of Africa, there's no mention of Germany or Holland or Russia or any of the land that the European Jews can really trace their ancestry to in the Torah. You know, yes, yes, and the Suez Canal was dug by men, you know, and yeah, Israel could be perceived as a part of Africa, and this is something that sounds crazy to a lot of people, but we have to just stop and consider. If we can consider Madagascar and Cape Verde and various places like this, which have no connection at all by land to the African continent and are further from the African continent than Israel is, then we just have to consider, why could we not consider Israel as a part of Africa? You know, and this is what some of the more rational Hebrew Israelites will tell you, that it's Northeast Africa. You know, but then, like I said, you've got some which are quite driven by hatred. They're going to use that movement as a way to sever their ties to the continent, which can't be done, by the way. Can't be done. That's not how it happened. Oh yeah, and you know the spiritual systems that we took on were often used. The spiritual systems that we took on from the Europeans were sometimes used as a way to camouflage the spiritual systems which we were used to from
Mm-hmm.
before. So that's how you get the influence of Catholicism within Haitian voodoo. You know, they could be pretending to be honoring some Catholic saints, but really and truly, that's not what is going on.
Mm-hmm.
Because in a place like Haiti, they lived under intense cultural suppression. They were under something called the Black Code. I'm not sure if you've heard about the Black Code,
The
the
black
Code
coat.
Noir. This is a document that essentially was written by the Europeans, which was their true Bible. This was the Europeans' Bible. He gave us the Bible to follow, but he didn't follow anybody. His Bible
Mm-hmm.
was the Code Noir, which is a book that was designed to regulate the treatment of enslaved people in the French colonies. And amongst the rules of that book, you had no drumming,
Oh
no
yes, I
drumming,
do know what
which
you're
we can
talking
touch.
about.
Yeah. No gathering of enslaved from different plantations. You had, but the most important part, which I was going to reference, right, is no ceremonies that are not Catholic shall be allowed, and all the enslaved must be baptized into the Roman Catholic
Mm-hmm.
religion. So this was law. So, you know, anybody who would choose to still hold on to a different spiritual route would have to camouflage it to an extent, because this was law. You know, it's just like when the Jewish people during the Second World War were persecuted, they essentially had to be Jewish in secret.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so the voodoo people and so forth,
Exactly.
they had to hold that within and maybe let it come out deep somewhere in the woods, or you know, when the blanc was not looking, but they couldn't
Mm-hmm.
they
Mm-hmm.
couldn't do that just out in the open, you
The
know.
blanc, yeah, that's funny because that's what they used to
Yeah,
call
man,
them.
we gotta mix in some of the lingo, man.
The yeah, cause you could see it. You see when you look at like Ogun in Cuba or
Mm,
Obatala, and you see the same ones in the Yoruba culture. And
and
when
in
you see
Haiti.
San Miguel, why we put their names on our, so
Mm-hmm.
that we could
Mm-hmm.
camouflage it. That's why you see
Mm-hmm.
San Miguel. That's Saint Michael, the archangel,
Mm.
and then
Oh
but
yeah,
we
yeah,
just
yeah.
disguised it. You know.
And in Haiti, right? Interestingly, when you mentioned Ogun, the first thing I thought of was Ogu. I
Mhm.
don't know if you've heard of Ogu in Haitian voodoo, but that's the Yoruba god of war and iron. You know, Ogu. It's literally the N came off and the U was
Mhm.
added onto the end, but we can see the resemblance, which just leads straight back to that Yoruba culture.
Mhm.
You know, according to Jacob Caruthers, when Bookman did the ceremony with Cecil Fatiman, it was
Mhm.
in accordance with the Ogun festival.
Mhm.
Let me see if perhaps I can. Where did I put that book? I had it 2 seconds ago. It
Bookman.
was in. It was in. it was in accordance with here it is. In accordance with the Ogun festival.
Mm-hmm.
It's at the start of the book, so it'll be quite easy to find. I'll just read that out and then perhaps we can just build some more upon that.
Yeah, Bookman said when he was giving his speech, he said, uh, we can't go back to our native Guinea, but this land smells like
Mm,
Guinea. It looks like Guinea. We'll make this our Guinea.
mm,
So what he was
yeah.
saying is, you have to be African in the mind.
And I believe it's funny you say that. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe there's a part of Haiti called Little Guinea.
Mm-hmm.
It would probably in Creole it would probably be Tigine or something like that. But I believe it's actually in this very book that I read that there's a part known as Little Guinea. I may have got that. I can
Cause
double
I know
check
he
that
was
after the
from
podcast.
well, his I believe his mother was from Senegal, if I'm not mistaken. I
Yeah,
know one of
yeah,
his parents was from Senegal.
yeah. Because I've always heard about Bookman as being somebody from Senegambia, but who had
Mm-hmm.
came to Haiti from Jamaica
Jamaica.
before that. But Guinea is a land that is quite connected to Haiti because, for example, you have I've read Makandal was from Guinea. So let me read this short piece about Bookman. It's literally one paragraph, right? The irritated genie of Haiti was called forth during the celebration of Ogun ceremony on August 14th, 1791. Ogun was the personification of the Vodun spirit of warfare and iron. The event took place in a forest near what at that time was called Cape Francois, the colonial capital. Bookman, as he was generally known, who was a Vodun priest, planned the launching of the revolution with a Goon celebration, in keeping with the time-tested tradition among African people that human events must be coordinated with cosmological forces and ancestral spirits. The revolution thus had its roots in the African worldview.
Mm-hmm.
That's the irritated genie. So, as you mentioned, Ogun being present in Cuba. Ogun was very, very present
Mm-hmm.
in Haiti as well. The driving force of that revolution.
Is in Cuba, are you familiar with the Abacoa? That's a secret society in
No,
Cuba.
to tell the truth, I am not the most well versed on Cuba. I know there's a tradition named Santeria
Yeah.
which is I'm sure the tradition that you're referring to, but
Mm-hmm.
in terms of to know enough to know secret societies,
They
no, not
like,
at all.
but they like legit. They have their own they have their own language. Like, but
Mm,
it is very misogynistic. Like, it got very, very corrupted over the years. But it is
mm,
something to show that we've always, set up these groups to help, like
yeah.
the Maroons in Haiti, the Maroons in Jamaica, the Seminoles
Mm-hmm.
here in the United States. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
people don't know. These are stories that we need to tell ourselves and not wait
Oh,
for
for sure.
somebody to come and tell, because they won't tell us these stories.
Yeah, as Marcus Garvey said, I've got his t-shirt on today. Marcus Garvey said we should expect very little by way of compliment from the pen of other races.
Hmm.
He even went as far as saying there is no white historian who has ever written about African people with any kind of love in his heart for the people, which is arguably true. I've read a few narratives which I could perhaps say that they're writing with no bias,
Hmm.
but for the most part, it is true. It is going to be told from another
Yeah.
perspective. It's going to subtly demonize and belittle us. It's going to subtly downplay the brutality inflicted upon us. So, as you said, we need to tell our own story. That's why it's good to have
Hmm.
podcasts such as this one. It's good to have our own content
Yeah.
creators, authors, etc.
Same thing with, like you say, you do music. It's good that
Yeah.
you want to do that and own your own music. Because that's the thing.
Oh,
We
yeah.
don't think about owning our own things. We want to run somebody to get a cut when they're benefiting off of our culture. They're exploiting
Oh,
us,
yeah.
and we need to change that.
Yeah, a lot of us, when it comes to music, unfortunately, because we know about the rhythm, we know about the lyricism, we know about producing, but when it comes to the contracts and the documents and the fine tuning, the little details, the small
Hmm.
print, we don't tend to know much, and even I myself, I must admit, I don't know much. And that's how you end up with people like for example, NWA. They were being exploited by Jerry Heller, this
Mhm.
rich Jewish guy. He wrote out a contract that they didn't really understand. He was taking more than he should have been
Mhm.
taking, but they had no idea. They were
Yeah.
just living the dream, you know?
But that goes into, even with the music. Go into the drum, brother. Go into why they had to ban the drum.
Well, the drum, right? It's known as the talking drum.
Mhm.
It's known as the talking drum because this drum was actually it was a means of communication um without drifting too far from Haiti, right? In Guadeloupe, where my grandparents are from, right? They have their own form of drumming, which was also banned because they were also under that black code, that code noir. And in that system of drumming, there are seven rhythms, and each of those rhythms carries their own vibration. There's one for grief, there's one for love, you've got one for ancestral trance, you've got one for war. So all of these things, not only were they communications, but they were things that could really raise a certain type of energy
Mhm.
within the people. I also think that these drum circles would have been a very fertile ground for African spirituality, and not only just that, but also for the forming of rebellious plots.
Mhm.
You're dancing
Yeah.
around the drum, you whisper in somebody's ear, yeah, let's kill the master tomorrow.
Mhm.
You know what
Yeah,
I
they
mean?
won't.
Like it gives them an opportunity to gather to discuss things that
Mhm.
the white man probably wouldn't want them to discuss. If you even look at the European armies, right?
Mhm.
When they march into war, in the old times, they had their drummer in front. So, the drum, the
Because they knew
drum, the
that has
drum is
a
a
that
powerful.
that has a certain powerful, a
Yeah,
powerful, like,
because
use.
it's like in the modern day, right? You know how much music has the ability to invoke a certain
Mhm.
emotion, there's certain songs you listen to it and all of a sudden you feel like the man. So if you're going into war to the sound of a certain drum rhythm, right? That can most definitely boost your psyche before the
Mhm.
battle. It can take your mind off the what if this, the what if that. You're just listening to that drum beat. You're tapping into your animal, to
Yeah.
I don't not
The
in a
ancestral,
dehumanizing
no, the
sense, but like
ancestral, just the
yeah, just a
ancestral
straight
vibe.
like
Yeah.
yeah, you're just in the moment. It's purely okay in your mind. Okay, this is what it is. The drum can really rise up your spirit. It was connected with revolution
Mhm.
across the region. And I'm not sure about in Haiti, but like even in Guadeloupe, when the drum was banned, it led to this is how much the people loved their percussion, right? It
Mhm.
led to something that they called the bulagel, which was a form of vocal percussion, which one could compare to beatboxing.
Mhm.
And then
Okay.
in the American South, when the drum was, because remember part of that was a French colony as
Yeah.
well, or Louisiana, that
A
they
lot
used
of
to
it.
speak Creole,
Mhm.
it's fading. So they also had that same situation, and that led to the development of jazz, the banding of the drums. So it's
We
very
always find
deep,
a way.
our
Yeah.
people. Music was always a way for us to not only ease our pain, but for us to raise our psyche. You
Mhm.
also have the spirituals in the States, which are a good example of that. So, it was in their best interest to suppress that that vibration of the
Mhm.
drum. I have a poem which actually speaks about the drum, right? And one of the things that I mention is that drum beat is the heartbeat of my people. That's why the writers of the Code Noir
Mhm.
made it illegal, because they wanted to keep us mentally and spiritually feeble, meaning weak,
Mhm.
you know?
And you touched on Louisiana being a French colony, and a lot of our people don't know that America's 50 states today because of Haiti, because of that Haitian Revolution, because
Mm,
Napoleon sent, I believe it was his cousin or his brother-in-law, one of the two, and to fight in Haiti. and we whooped those soldiers. They couldn't even we fought the most cracked men, Napoleon's most cracked men. That's how Scobie explains it.
Mhm.
His most cracked men,
Mhm.
like the most crazy ones, and we were beating
Mhm.
them, destroying them.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I forgot the general's name. I believe it was it started
The
with a
French one or
K.
the
Yeah,
Haitian
the
one?
the French one, Leclerc, something like
Leclerc. Yeah. Yeah.
Leclerc, right?
Yeah.
Was he was the one I believe who sent to Dessalines so they could tell him, I'm gonna find Dessalines and I'm gonna chop him up piece by piece. He said he was gonna take out hit one eyeball at a time, one nostril, one ear, and you know what Dessalines told him? He sent to tell him, "Hey, you better hope I don't find you, cause if I do, that's what I'm gonna do to you. You will never do that to me."
Mhm. And Desaline, you know he would do a good job at that.
He wouldn't play those games.
Desaline, boy, don't play with Desaline, man.
And
Don't play with
you see the
Desaline.
Africanisms. You see it in different. There's an Instagram page. It's called Know Your Caribbean,
Oh, I know that one.
and
Yeah.
they show the dances, the how even through
Mm.
spread out through the Caribbean. We're doing the same thing because us as a people, we don't change. You know, like
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
held on
Yeah.
to a lot of those things. We keep those Africanisms.
It's yeah. It signifies the common root, and this can be seen within language, music,
Hmm.
dance, food.
Even
The list
rituals.
goes on.
Rituals. You
Oh
see
yeah.
when
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
pop a bottle and you pour a little bit out for the homie who ain't there.
Oh
That's
yeah.
pouring
Yeah.
out
Yeah. Yeah.
libations, and we don't
That's a
know why. But you
libation
ask a
right
brother
there.
from the block, yo, why you just did that? Oh, cause my homie ain't here. Oh, but why? He ain't gonna drink that. Why you did it? They don't know that that's
Mm.
just something we've been doing for tens of thousands of years. It's just what we
Yeah,
do.
yeah, because it's just ingrained into
Mhm.
us and we don't know the root, but then this is what scholarship actually brings to the forefront
Mhm.
because once you start to study and cross-reference some of these practices, you actually say, okay, so there must be a link somewhere
Mhm.
in one way or another, and essentially that's what I was saying without jumping back into that topic. That's what I was saying earlier with the Hebrews. I used to debate a lot of these people, but then through noticing some similar, I said, okay, there has to be a link
Mhm.
somewhere, but we'll go back into that. But yeah, when it comes to these cultural practices across the Caribbean, it signifies a common root. We mentioned Ogu, that
Mhm.
draws us straight to the Yoruba. I mentioned language, I know you said that you're looking to learn Creole. Remember, I was telling you that Creole, I would recommend learning it just for a better understanding of the
Mhm.
culture,
Of
because
the culture.
when it comes to like even the ethnic demographics, I think we can make a good estimate at our ethnic makeup just by analyzing the language, the
Mhm.
linguistic influences, because you must be familiar with the word moon, for example, right?
Mhm.
Moon Haiti, moon Guadeloupe,
Yeah.
moon Itazini. You know the word moon,
Yeah.
right, people? So a lot of people think that comes from the French monde, but it doesn't. It comes from a word in Central Africa and also in South Africa, the people they know as the Bantu people, they
Mhm.
refer to the human being as Muntu or Umuntu. So what we
Mhm.
essentially did is we took the Muntu, meaning human being, and we took the two off the
Yeah.
end and we kept the Mun, and that is now what we call people to this day in Haiti, in Guadeloupe, in Saint Lucia, in Martinique, in Dominica,
Mhm.
and the list goes on. So what does that signify? A lot of us came from that Congo region and
Exactly.
surrounding
Mhm.
areas.
That's exactly true. When we look at in the Congo, what the because at first it was the Spanish Congo,
Mm,
and then when the Belgians went in, see this is why I say we need to tell our stories. A lot of people don't know about the tens of millions who died and who got the limbs cut off by these people coming in to
King
take
Leopold and
our resources, and we come from the most
Rubber.
resource rich land in the world, and we want to
Oh
deny
yeah.
it, we want to give it up, you
Oh
know.
yeah. And it's disturbing to me because once I discovered that And I learned that in Belgium, when you go into the confectionaries in um in Belgium where they make the Belgian chocolate, they still have chocolate-shaped hands.
Hands.
That's sick.
Very sick.
Because when I see that, I can just imagine a child having that cut off 100 or so years ago, you know. And like you said, it's an unspoken of history. Goes back to the same thing we mentioned, why it's important to tell our own stories, because we have people who would never equate somebody like Adolf Hitler to this Belgian King Leopold.
Or
But
even
then
to
when we
George
look at
Washington.
numbers, yeah, and then when we look at the numbers, these people are the same or worse. Leopold is estimated around 10 million Congolese died under him. You know, somebody like Hitler, if you take into account, of course, the 6 million Jewish, but not only them, obviously all the people that died in the war surrounding that, who knows what the total number was. So that's why I said, somebody like Leopold, he's on the same level, if not worse, but through us not telling our own story, how many Congolese people have influenced the high school curriculums across the world and so forth. So then, when you want to compare such people, it's like people will look at you like you're crazy sometimes.
They definitely will. And that's why I say, like, it comes from pain. I say a lot when you hear Snoop Dogg or someone say, oh look, where they're playing Roots again, they only want to show us how they did us. No, we have to tell our story. Are you familiar with Brother Jabari Osaze?
No, I'm not.
He's a very good scholar. He studied under Dr. Ben and Dr. Clark. You should check him out. He did a presentation
For sure.
on cause he took a trip to Ghana. He's a chief now, a Ghanaian chief in one of the villages over there. I believe in around Accra, around there.
Okay.
But he did a presentation showing how he was at the Elmina slave dungeon, and he showed where. Are you familiar with the slave dungeon? They call it a slave castle.
On the top?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and he showed the space where they kept the men. First of all, they had the door was on an incline, so if the brothers tried to like huddle up and bust through the door, they had to go up, so they would lose like motion. Then they said they would stuff them in there like sardines, bro. And and the European reporters say, like, the soldiers, they say when they would go in there, like they would drill a hole, like poke a hole through, and that the stench was so bad because our people were in there defecating where they ate, literally.
No hygiene at all.
Literally.
Yeah.
You see where they be like, don't shit where you eat? They were literally shitting where they eat.
They were forced to.
Yeah,
they were forced to. Where they eat, where they sleep, all of it. Yeah. Just like in the decks of those slave ships, they had no choice. They had absolutely no choice.
And the ancestors forbid that they like someone died in there. They wouldn't check in there until they will come to get our ancestors.
Yeah. So then that's just adding to the unsanitary conditions, because you've got a corpse in the room now.
People don't like realize, like, we're the strongest people on the planet. They tried to wipe us out and they couldn't. Like, they legit couldn't. So we need to be proud of that. They didn't enslave us for what we didn't have. They enslaved us for what we had, because we had so much.
There is most certainly a duality to that experience, because a lot of learning about that experience can invoke shame to a degree in some people, because they're thinking, wow, my history is oppression, my history is suffering, etc. But on one hand, it's a story of oppression and suffering. But, of course, it's important to emphasize that it's just one chapter of our story. But in the wider, even when you just focus on that particular chapter, the actual level of resistance, as I even mentioned earlier, the creative resistance in face of oppression, is fascinating, and it's something I can take pride in.
I take pride in it too, because we never stopped fighting. From the time we left the coast, we didn't stop fighting. They literally said that sharks would follow the enslavement ships because mother would throw their babies over.
That's crazy.
Because the mother thought that's a better life than being enslaved.
Yeah, yeah.
That was
And
a better life.
we have within some of our spiritual concepts, we didn't so much believe in death. There was the migration of the soul, transmigration of the soul. So some of these people would believe, well, if I just jump over, I'll be reborn in my
Yeah,
homeland anyway,
exactly.
and that's a troublesome belief when you for a people you're trying to oppress to have, and that is why religion does play such a significant role in the indoctrination and control and oppression of our ancestors.
Dr. Ben always said that religion is the deification of a culture. So, it has to
I
be,
like what you just said.
it has to, we
I
have to
like what you
deify
just said.
ourselves. We have to put ourselves back on that pedestal. And it's funny, it's not funny. I like how you said that they take some shame in it, but they also don't know that before that, Dr. Clark said that if you were to write a book on African history, you will read like 1,000 pages, and then the last page would be enslavement, those 400 years, because we've done so much. But if they don't
Yeah.
if our people don't familiarize themselves with what we've done, they won't be able to
Oh yeah,
take the pride
because
in it.
let's look at just before this period of history started, the Columbian conquest of the Americas and then the transatlantic slave trade that came after that. You had the Moorish occupation of Spain and Portugal, and the
700
last
years.
Moorish kingdom, yep, the last Moorish kingdom in Spain was the Kingdom of Granada, and that was conquered by King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella in 1492, which is the same land that Columbus quote unquote discovered the Americas. So, the same year,
Same
sorry,
year, yeah.
same year that Columbus quote unquote discovered the Americas. So it's like, that when he, discovered the Americas, that kind of was the first page in the story of what would be a few centuries of oppression for our people, right? But literally the page, the previous chapter, 1492 was that turning point. We had Moorish people in Europe teaching science and astronomy and basic hygiene.
we
We
get
don't
we
even
gave
need
them their first
we don't even
university.
need to go into
Yeah,
this. Pardon?
we gave them their first university,
Oh yeah.
the
Oh yeah.
University of
And even
Salamanca, right?
uh-huh. And even over in Timbuktu in Mali, that's where some of the first universities are as well. And that's a hotbed of Moorish people as well. You had a strong African Islamic culture in places like Timbuktu with a high importance placed on education and so forth. And these Moorish people, right, as we were saying earlier, are a great part of the people that actually ended up in Haiti. So, this story, that's why I actually mentioned that when we mentioned the larger picture and the great stories that we've been involved in that weren't anything to do with oppression. When you look at the Moorish people in Spain and Portugal, some of those people are the very same people who ended up in Haiti, so that kind of just signifies the greatness that
Even in the UK.
that, oh yeah, yeah, I was listening to is it Scobie?
Scobie, you heard about
Yeah,
his
he was
friend?
talking about Cornwall. Yeah, he
Yeah,
was he was
he's
he
like,
was talking about Cornwall.
I'm a
I'm a
corny
Cornish man,
man.
I'm not an
He's
Englishman.
not an
What do you
Englishman.
mean? Yeah, yeah. To
Yeah.
be honest, I've lived here for most of my life in this country, right? And I'd never heard anything about Moors in Cornwall.
He's like, I'm telling
Because
you,
we
I'm of Moorish descent. He's like, you're an Englishman. He's like, no. He's like, I like Scobie though. Scobie
yeah,
represents for the
these
Lyskins.
yeah, yeah. These are untold stories, right?
Yeah.
Because when it comes to the Moors in Europe, right? They were dominating Spain, large parts of Spain and Portugal, right? But that doesn't mean they didn't go any further than that. So it was a shock for me to hear of Moors in Cornwall, and that's definitely something that I'll be researching a lot more, because I've got a few hunches based on that, but I don't wanna express those ideas too much until I do a bit of research.
I
But
feel you.
in future we could definitely we
Of
could
course,
definitely
this is
follow
not
up
the
on that,
first
because
one. We're
the
gonna
Moorish
build.
story, right? The
Mhm.
Moorish story, as much as it's connected to Haiti, is definitely worthy of an entire podcast in
Yes, on
itself.
itself.
Maybe even multiple podcasts.
Because
You
even the
know what I
man
mean?
who sailed with Columbus, Pedro Alonso Nino, he was a Moorish. He
Mhm.
was a Moor man.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, right? I've got a book, Story of the Moors in Spain. I think I've got it somewhere here. If I don't find it, that's stretch out for it. This one, right? So this book, remember when I mentioned earlier, Garvey said there's no white historian that's written about African people with any kind of love. I would say if anyone has done it, it's this guy here, Stanley Lane Poole, because this was a
Stanley
white
Lane
British
Poole.
historian.
I need to
Yeah,
get
but
that book.
he actually had a good insight into the Moorish story, because I'm not sure if he could fluently read and write Arabic himself, but his brother was very into the Arabic, according to what I've read. So essentially, he could actually even understand and translate the Arabic text, which of course gives his works a lot more depth. In his book, right, The Story of the Moors in Spain, he mentions the Moors teaching shipbuilding in Europe, teaching astronomy in Europe, navigation, and so forth. And so it makes perfect sense that there would be Moors on board the ship. And not only does it align with what I mentioned earlier, 1492 is when the Spanish finally managed to conquer the Moors. Same year Columbus found America. Is that a coincidence? That's why in my song, I've got a song called More Knowledge on my channel. I said, the same year of Granada in Spain's fall is the same year Columbus reached America. There's something they ain't telling us, because I believe that's a big clue. Do you know what I mean? Even in one of the films they made about Columbus, the men on the boat were portrayed as the Europeans on the boat were portrayed as being confused. And at one point, they came to question him, as you naturally do when someone is leading you and you don't so much trust their leadership. What are you doing? Where are you taking us? And then one of the men stood up and said, I know what he's doing. He's navigating with the stars, just like the Moors did. So it's like even within their films and whatnot, they've left a few clues. They've left a few clues to this. And as I said, these are the people that ended up in Haiti. It's an overlooked part of the Haitian story, the Moorish
Of
influence.
course.
You can see it. You can see it within the historic records. You have people like Makandal, who was known as a Muslim, who they say could read and speak fluent Arabic. And of Bookman, the same is said. Sometimes he's described as more of a Fudan man. Sometimes he's described as more of a Islamic man. But to tell the truth, I believe he was both, as many people over there are. Because just as how we mentioned Catholicism blending in with various African spiritual systems, the same can be seen with Islam and various African spiritual systems. I guess this would be a good time to share the screen and show some of the things about the Moors in Haiti. So let me just get that one up. Mm, 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 mm. Screen. So just let me know if you can see, because I'm going to put it onto the full screen so that people can read this one. Yeah, so this is some stuff that I'd put onto my Instagram a while ago, right? Moorish African inspired architecture and construction in Haiti. So on the left you've got Henri Christophe, on the right you've got the depiction of the Moorish chief, which is the same guy you've got on the cover of this book, right? So this was actually brought to my attention by a few Haitian scholars on Instagram, but particularly Brother Hassan, who did a video. He highlighted multiple similarities between the Haitian people and the Moorish people. And then, when we look at, for example, the Sanssouci Palace that we can see in the top left and the Alhambra, we can see a certain resemblance. This is not a French style of building. This was built after the revolution. And one of the points that I actually made in my caption on the Instagram is that, you see, similarly to how the Haitian people, Dessalines and those present, they took the white out of the French flag to signify breaking free from Europe, right? So essentially, one could say an artistic expression of an anti-colonial mind, an anti-colonial movement. I believe this may have been also present within the architecture, that, okay, we've defeated the French. Let's see if we can try to project our culture not only via removing the white from the flag, but perhaps removing the French influence on our architecture. These arches on the Sanssouci, they're known as Moorish arches. They're very similar to what you can see on the Alhambra. And then Henri Christophe's advisor, known as Pompée Valentin Vasti, he says, right, the buildings were erected by descendants of Africans, showing that we have not lost the architectural taste and genius of our ancestors who covered Ethiopia, Egypt, Carthage, and Old Spain with their superb monuments. And Old Spain, of course, as I've written, it refers to the Andalusian kingdoms of the Moors. And then Carthage was once used to refer to North Africa. And of course, we know Egypt is in North Africa, which is really and truly the home of the Moors, which is just one of many things that signifies a common root between the Haitians and the Moorish people. We've also got the citadel, which we can compare to this building. Pardon? Yeah, that's the citadel in Haiti on the top, and that's a on the bottom, that's a Moorish castle in Spain. So you see, when he said, we have not lost the architectural taste and genius of our ancestors who covered Ethiopia, etc., Egypt, Carthage, and old Spain, I can see that, as I like to say, we've got the receipts. Do you know what I mean? We've got the proof, and this is another one that I drew a parallel between. This is a Moorish castle in Portugal, which once again is somewhat comparable. You've got this kind of square part in the corner. It's on a hilltop. It's slanted down with a kind of diagonal. Yeah, it's comparable, and then we've got the sources to back it up, and we've got receipts also of that Moorish Arabic influence being present in Haiti, of course, with people like Bookman and Makandal.
Speak on this before we close, brother. Speak on the Citadel a little bit, because a lot of people don't know that, especially our people. The Citadel was very you know, constructed in a way where there's one way in, one way out. You can enter. There's one way to enter, and you have to enter on foot, if I'm not mistaken. And then up there was schools, like kitchens, places for people to do stuff like that.
Let me share the screen again. To tell the truth, I'm not the most well versed on the ins and outs of the Citadel, but essentially, correct me if I'm wrong. Are you hinting that the Citadel was a strategic point for the Haitian people? Well, that would make perfect sense to me. Just looking at where it's positioned so high up. This is of course a great advantage when it comes to battle, having the high ground for vision, and then of course your enemies being forced to go uphill. I won't say too much. Like I said, I haven't studied the citadel under a microscope, apart from the drawing the parallel between the Moorish and the Haitian style of construction. But what I would say for sure is that it signifies the shoulders of giants that the Haitian people are standing on just from the architecture alone. And this aerial shot is great. Like, look at this diamond kind of shape and whatnot. This was built by a people who were reduced into slavery, but it just it just signifies the vast amount of knowledge that they had before and even during and after being reduced to that condition of being essentially slaves. But there's so much more to the Haitian people than just that. And that is why I said, to say the least, without talking too much about what I've not deeply studied in regards to the strategic significance of the citadel. I've been quite interested in the architecture of the citadel. It definitely signifies the shoulders of giants that the Haitian people are standing on. The architectural taste and genius of their ancestors,
Mm-hmm.
as Pompey Valentin did say.
Yeah, when you I don't know if you're familiar with Professor James Smalls.
Yes, yes.
He went in on the Haitian Revolution, and he speaks on that. He speaks on how, it was they built it a certain way.
Mm.
But my brother, I'm gonna give you the floor. I'm gonna let you close out. But this is one of
So
many. One of
one
many.
last thing. Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. It's
So,
been a pleasure.
mhm,
One last thing, just because you mentioned Professor James Smalls, he
mhm,
even was speaking about the Islamic Moorish influence in Haiti, and
mhm,
he spoke about the voodoo deity Dambala, and
mhm.
he was suggesting that perhaps this is connected to I believe he was suggesting this is perhaps connected to, of course, Allah. But, you know, you gave it to me to close, not to go off on another tangent. I just say that it's been a pleasure. And like I
Let them know
said,
where they
this will
could find
definitely
you,
be the
brother.
first of many.
Mhm,
We've touched, the tip of the iceberg.
mhm,
But I think we've touched many aspects of Haiti and even gone into some ancient
mhm.
history that does connect to that. The Moors. We touched on Kemet briefly. We touched on the Hebrew Israelites, and all of those are worthy of a podcast
Mhm.
in themselves. So I hope in the future we can most definitely do that.
So let them know where they could find you, brother.
Okay, so you can find me on Instagram under at bookman_x, and you can find me on YouTube with the same name, just without the underscore in between the bookman and the X. So you could just type bookmanx. It would be good if you could leave a link in the
I will.
description
Oh,
to the channel.
I
I'll
got you.
send it over to you.
Yeah, my brother, I appreciate you so much. This is once again
Same
one
one
of
to you.
many.
Oh
So
yeah,
you already
for
know.
sure.
I appreciate you. This will see right through.